Chapter 12 The Blythe Girls, Helen, Margie, and Rose by Laura Lee Hope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12 Rex Appears. Miss Pepper stared for a moment, then broke into a shrill cackle of amusement. "You have a sense of humor!" she cried. "Best thing in the world! Sense of humor! Now let's get down to work." It was some time before Margie found out just what this work consisted of. Miss Pepper being rather vague on the subject herself, it was not strange that Margie should be mystified. However, she came to the conclusion, after studying the litter of papers on Miss Pepper's desk, that her work would consist chiefly in reducing Miss Pepper's rather disconnected writings and peppery speech to letters in good social form. Also, she would be expected to keep on file records of club meetings and data to be used at such meetings. Having discovered this much, she plunged wholeheartedly into her work. Just to be busy was a relief, for during this first conversation with her employer, Miss Pepper had been uncomfortably near to discharging her several times, and Margie knew it. The eccentric Miss Pepper might think she liked her now, but the next moment she was quite capable of regarding her as her bitterest enemy. "It will be about as comfortable as living on the edge of a volcano," she thought ruefully. "You never know when it may start erupting and bury everybody, including Margie Blythe, in ashes 2 feet deep." During the days that followed, she came more and more to believe that her first impression of the new position had been the correct one. Miss Pepper was kind to her and considerate in a rather extraordinary way, but she was always asking unexpected questions and expecting Margie to know by instinct what things she wanted done without being told. The brightest spot in her new life was marked by the first visit of her sisters to the home of Miss Pepper. Margie was just entering her room late one afternoon to freshen up for dinner when she heard voices in the hall below. This was not strange, since Miss Pepper often had late callers, but these voices were raised as though in altercation, and one of them Margie recognized as belonging to the pert maid Jane. She turned slowly from the door of her room toward the stairway, and as she did so, heard Jane exclaim in her thin treble: "I'm sure the new social secretary is engaged with the mistress's business and cannot be disturbed." "And I am quite sure she will gladly be disturbed if you will be kind enough to tell her we are here," said another voice, Helen's voice. Rose was with her, for as Margie began hurriedly to descend the stairs, she heard another familiar voice say impatiently: "I'd like to know if you're going to keep us standing here all day." "No, miss, not at all, miss," broke in another voice, and Margie knew that Oliver had appeared on the scene. She had reached the bend in the stairway and could see them all plainly. "If you would be so good, miss, as to tell me your name." "These young ladies are my sisters, Oliver," said Margie quietly, and Oliver turned to her with an apologetic air. "Quite so, miss. Jane here did not understand." What it was that Jane did or did not understand never came to light, for at that moment Rose flung her arms about her sister with a cry of delight. "You old darling!" she cried, regardless of the indulgent Oliver and the supercilious Jane. "We thought we'd lost you for good, Margie. Now hurry and show us everything, for we've only a little while to stay." Margie hugged them both as they went up the wide staircase together, and for some absurd reason her eyes were full of tears, and her throat held a lump it was hard to swallow. However, Rose kept up a running fire of comment that made it unnecessary for her to talk. "Isn't Oliver a perfect lamb?" Rose chuckled. "You were quite right about his 3 chins, Margie dear. They're beautiful. But that dreadful maid, Jane is her name? I don't see how you stand her about. I couldn't. Oh, Margie, you don't mean to say that you really live here?" For they had reached Margie's room, and the latter had flung open the door with an air of pride. "It's mine," she assured them. "At least for as long as I stay with Miss Pepper," she added, so ruefully that Helen gave her a quick, anxious glance. "Everything's all right, isn't it, dear?" she questioned. "You're quite happy in your work?" "Oh, I love it," said Margie with such evident sincerity that Helen was satisfied. A happy time of inspecting everything and exclaiming about everything followed, and Margie began to feel at home in her new surroundings for the first time. If only she might keep her sisters with her always. From the first, Margie found her work interesting, and as the days went on and she accustomed herself to her surroundings, she became very well satisfied with her lot. It was not long before she found out, too, that so far from being almost mad, as she had at first thought her, Miss Pepper was extraordinarily clever. She belonged to several worthwhile women's clubs, was president of one, and the chairman of an important committee in another, and was deeply interested in child welfare work. As this last also interested Margie keenly, a bond of mutual sympathy and understanding strengthened their relationship, growing gradually into friendship. Miss Pepper was interested in the girl's desire to become more proficient in her typewriting and stenography, and generously gave her a chance to gratify this desire by giving her all her evenings free. Margie immediately started a night school course. This took up 3 evenings a week and left her the others to spend with Helen and Rose in the tiny uptown flat. It was about 2 weeks after her entrance into the Pepper household that Margie discovered that her employer possessed a male relative. Miss Pepper had never spoken of any family connections, and Margie had gradually come to believe that the maiden lady was alone in the world. But she discovered her mistake when Rex Pepper appeared upon the scene. Rex was about 21, but he looked and acted scarcely 19. He was good looking in a large featured fashion, extravagantly well dressed and carefully groomed. Margie never saw him when a hair on his sleekly brushed head was out of place or his tie awry. He had a grin too, good natured and disarming, which he seemed never to take off. Margie and Miss Pepper were seated in the library one day while the latter dictated letters to the various clubs in which she was interested, when a sudden noise and sound of altercation was heard without.
"But she's busy, sir. She left special orders that she was not to be disturbed."
"Oh, go chase yourself around the block, old porpoise," came in cheery masculine tones. "You know very well she will welcome me with open arms. I say, Oliver, my coat and stick. What ho, are you blind?" This last was uttered in a tone of authority which evidently cowed the protesting Oliver. He was heard to murmur something about
"No, sir, not at all, sir."
and the next moment a grinning young giant parted the curtains and stepped into the library. The expression of Miss Pepper had been growing gradually more forbidding in the last few seconds, but the newcomer seemed not to notice it. He walked right over to the little old lady, lifted her by the elbows from her chair, deliberately kissed her on both cheeks, and set her gently down again. "There now, you aren't going to be cross with your only beloved nephew, are you?" he wheedled, as Miss Pepper's expression remained stern and unrelenting. "Especially when he has just returned from a horrible cruise on a horrible yacht."
"Can't you see I'm busy?"
Miss Pepper snapped at him by the barest perceptible gesture, indicating her rather startled but amused secretary.
"Are you blind?"
"Not at all," retorted Rex, turning deliberately and letting his eyes rest with admiration upon Margie's flushed face. "I am in full possession of my eyesight, my dear aunt, and mighty thankful I am for it." Margie's eyes dropped before the admiration in his. For some reason, she was furiously angry with him. "A spoiled young cub, that's what he is," she thought resentfully. "And how I detest that type." There was a great deal more of the same kind of conversation between Rex Pepper and his aunt, while the latter grew more and more exasperated, and the grin of the former grew more wicked in the enjoyment of baiting the little old lady. Time and again Rex Pepper made an attempt to draw Margie into the conversation, but she never once raised her eyes from the pad in her hand. It was Miss Pepper who finally won, and she fairly shooed the lumbering, overgrown boy out of the library. For all the world, thought Margie, like a little belligerent hen pecking at a great, good-natured Newfoundland dog. Miss Pepper came back to Margie, and without saying a word of this extraordinary invasion of her privacy, she began dictating a letter. Then, as suddenly, stopped to question sharply, "Well, what do you think of him?" Think of whom?" queried Margie, feigning ignorance.
"Of that great lumbering idiot of a nephew of mine," retorted the old lady angrily. "Whom suppose meant? Oliver?"
"I didn't know," retorted Margie, eyes demurely downcast. "You didn't mention any names."
"Well, aren't you going to answer me? What think of him?"
cried the old lady, more irritably than before. "Do you want to know my honest opinion?" asked Margie, looking up at the old lady, who snapped at her in answer.
"That's what asked you, wasn't it?"
"Well then," said Margie slowly, "I should say that he was considerably spoiled and awfully conceited."
"Right!" cried the surprising old woman, delighted. "I said you had brains. Come on now, work!"
For the next hour or two Margie was kept so busy that she never gave a thought to Rex Pepper. In fact, she had forgotten that any such person existed when she was suddenly confronted by that gentleman himself. Miss Pepper had finished her dictation and had gone upstairs to rest, while Margie lingered to rearrange some notes she had taken. So she was quite alone when Rex Pepper put in his appearance. A shadow fell across her page and she looked up startled to see him standing beside her. He seemed taller and broader than ever, and he still wore his amiable grin. "You aren't going to work any longer, are you?" he asked in the same wheedling tone he'd used with his angry aunt. "You really shouldn't, you know. Not on a day like this." "I haven't had time to find out what kind of a day it is," returned Margie coldly, hastily gathering up her notes in preparation for flight. "That's just the point," urged this overgrown boy, evidently not in the least dismayed by her icy manner. "You shouldn't allow my aunt to make a slave of you. She's a kindly old soul at heart." It was on the tip of Margie's tongue to retort that she must be very good natured and kind indeed to put up with such a nephew, but in the course of her short apprenticeship in the employ of Miss Pepper, she had learned to control such impulses. Instead, she made no reply at all. She merely gathered up her papers and started for the door. At this, Rex Pepper protested in an injured tone. "You don't mean to say you're going to run away like that?" he cried, adding urgently, "I say, can't you wait long enough for a fellow to ask you a question?" Margie, at the door, hesitated and half turned. There was something boyish and eager in his tone that for the moment disarmed her. Rex Pepper reached her side in 2 strides and looked down at her appealingly. "I say, it's such a glorious day. Won't you come for a ride? The little old bus isn't much to look at, but it sure shows some speed." "No, thank you," replied Margie as coldly as she could. "I have some work to do." "Oh, well, I suppose I should have expected that, since I know what you think of me." Margie looked at him sharply. "What do you mean by that?" she asked. "Why," Rex explained, and he was still wearing his disarming grin. "Oh, I happened to hear your private and quite plainly expressed opinion of me." "You were listening?" Margie flared at him. "You were eavesdropping." "Not at all," protested Rex Pepper, looking pained. "I just happened to be passing. But I say, won't you change your mind and come for a ride?" Margie swept past him with the air of a queen. She stopped at the foot of the stairs to transfix him with a look. "I thought," she said icily, "that I had already answered that question." End of chapter 12.